Greetings and salutations, this is Perfect Reject WolfSnake Games, and I'm here to bring you guys a little bit of a hands-on review for a little bit of an older system. And it's got a rather large cult following, so I'm not really telling some of you guys anything new, but that system is the Sega Dreamcast. First thing I want to talk about is the system itself, and as you can see, it's got a nice square shape. It's about 7 inches by 2 inches by 7 inches. It's got a really interesting sleek design kind of thing going here. It's got these little rivets for design as well. It's got this little piece here, your little light for when you have the power on, and you have the Dreamcast logo, of course, with the orange swirl. And in European and Australian areas, the orange swirl is actually blue instead. Something about copywriting with the orange swirl already being taken. You have the power button here, and on this side you have the open button. So the top loader disc, one of my favorite things about the older disc systems. On the front you'll notice you have 4 controller ports, A, B, C, D. You have the Sega logo, and right here you have compatible with Microsoft Windows CE. On this side you have your cooling fan. You'll notice this little rivet. That's actually a built-in modem that you can remove. You can replace it with a broadband adapter, but the regular cable modem or telephone modem actually came right in the box, so you could go ahead and plug it in and get to playing online. You have your AV and AC out, so every system has that. What system could run without that? You have your serial port, and the serial port was actually not very commonly used. It was supposed to be like the System Link system between the Dreamcast, but they never really got to utilizing it. And then there was also the SNK handheld, I believe it was the Neo Geo, had a connection wire, so you could play something like Capcom vs SNK from the handheld to the system and unlock new stuff that you couldn't get other ways. This side, nothing. Bottom, all your standard FC information. So nothing really special about the bottom too much, but it will actually tell you, if you have a certain system. It also used, GD-ROMs, which were a gigabit disc, which for the time was actually pretty good. The DVDs that Sony come out with were obviously blew it out of the water, but for the most part it was something that was a little ahead of its time right there. It pushed forward to make sure it got something that was better than what the other systems had at their disposal at the time. Unfortunately, they're basically the same format as a CD-ROM, except for just a little bit extra data. And you can burn the images from a disc and burn them to a CD-ROM and run them in a system as long as it was made before October 2000. Which can be beneficial since it's not illegal to own a backup copy of your disc, and if you got a Japanese or a European game, you couldn't play it on the system because of the simple fact that the system has a region lock. But if you went and burnt a backup copy, you could run the backup copy on the system without having to buy a foreign system. Now next we're actually going to move on to the controller, and as you can tell, it's got some sort of similar feel to it when you look at it. It's got 2 triggers on the back. It has your diamond pattern buttons, which are kind of signature with systems nowadays. You have your joystick here and the D-pad underneath, and you have your start button. Now the wire is coming out of the bottom. It has this little notch here that you can push it into, which sometimes it just falls out when you're playing games anyway, so it's kind of pointless to even really do anything with it. But right here you'll notice you have 2 slots, and on the front there's a hole. Now the 2 slots are for memory cards and rumble packs, etc. Some accessories that you can put into the system. But the screen on the front is for if you use a VMU, you plug it in and it shows some primitive graphics depending on the game that you're playing, and with some it'll actually show your score, or with something like Sonic Shuffle it'll actually show your card here so the other players can't see it. Now, going from this over to the VMU itself, the VMU actually, you already saw it has an LCD screen, and it's got little buttons on it. With certain games you could actually download mini games to the VMU and you could play them away from the system. You would actually have to have batteries in this, which I do not because of them dying too quickly. I wouldn't waste my money. If you get one with batteries in it, that's neat, but I wouldn't waste my money on new batteries. Another little interesting thing that the VMU could do is you could plug a VMU into another VMU. So if you did have batteries in both of them and you were playing, I don't know, Sonic Adventures 2, where you could download Chow after working it up and you could still build it up in this, you could actually battle with a friend. Another thing you could do is if you had a save data that you wanted to share with a friend, as long as it wasn't uncopyable, you could put these two together, send your save data over to him, let him take a copy of it, or completely move it if you just wanted to clear up space or organize your VMUs. So that was pretty interesting. Now to move on about a little bit of history behind the Dreamcast. With the Dreamcast, it had a very short-lived lifespan. It was about 2 years before the system really hit rock bottom and they stopped making any more extra consoles. I think for another year or two there were games still being made for it by developers, big name developers, but ultimately its life had already been outrun by that time. It was mostly because of Sega's previous history, where they had made the 32X and the Sega CD, and not a lot of people were too happy with those. They actually lost quite a bit of consumers out of that deal. It almost made them look desperate to get more people to look in their direction. And putting the Genesis on that kind of life support just wasn't a good idea. The Genesis had already outlived its time, so it was time to bring out a new system, and they waited too long. When they did, they finally made the Sega Saturn. And with the Sega Saturn, they made a big mistake at E3 with their surprise launch. They didn't even tell the developers that were making games. They didn't even tell the shops that were supposed to be holding these systems. And ultimately, nobody really wanted to stock them because they came in at a bad time. The developers stopped wanting to make games for them because they didn't have the time they thought they needed to make the games. So Sega did kind of shoot themselves in the foot. And with the Dreamcast, they made a couple of mistakes. Like I said, the disc that they used was the GD-ROM. They didn't really have an anti-piracy measure in it, so there wasn't really any incentive for people to buy games after they got a hold of CD Burner, which at this time was up and coming as a big popular media source. And ultimately, when Sony announced that they had a DVD player installed in the system and that the system was going to have better specs in pretty much every way, that's what really twisted the knife that Sega dug into their own flesh. Because at that time, especially in Japan in 1998, DVDs weren't that big of a thing. And when Sony announced that they were going to have a DVD player and it was going to be basically the cheapest DVD player on the market, that's what sold it, for Japan at least, in the most part. Same thing happened with the PlayStation 3 here in America. I know for a fact that my dad only bought it because it was the cheapest Blu-ray player on the market at the time. So I guess you could say that Sony had its put in it, but really, Sega, you dug your own grave. You just waited for somebody to throw the dirt on top of you. It's unfortunate. I love you. Always been a fanboy, but you done a good thing. You just waited too long. That's all I got to say about that. But one thing that is actually interesting is, like I said before, you'll notice that right here it says compatible with Microsoft Windows CE. And a little bit of research that I've done has actually pointed to the direction that when Sega got out of the console business, they passed on their patents for their hardware to Microsoft. And that might explain why, if you look at the original Xbox controller, it had the 2 slots for memory cards, it had the 2 triggers featured, it had 2 extra buttons, and other than that, it pretty much looked the same. 2 extra buttons and a joystick, and you pretty much had the same controller. Other than they fixed the strange wire thing. But with that, I'm going to leave this video off. That was a little bit of a hands-on review, a little bit of a history and downfall of the Dreamcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give a comment, rate, like, subscribe, do what you do. If you like this video, give it a lick, and enjoy the remainder of your day.